Hey, welcome back to my Sketchbook Systems series, where I'll be sharing with you how I take an illustration from start to finish through multiple sketchbooks that bounce off of each other. I'm Megan, by the way. I'm an aspiring children's illustrator, and what I'm really hoping to do with this channel is share my way of working with other artists and see what you're all up to as well. So do leave a comment and maybe even subscribe if you want to get to know me better. Now, a quick recap for those of you if you've missed the last couple of instalments of the Sketchbook System series. What it essentially boils down to, my sketchbook system, is one smaller sketchbook and two larger sketchbooks, specifically an A4 one and a couple of A3 ones. I think of the first small sketchbook as a bit of a messy design book. This is where I just dump all my ideas in and I don't worry too much about presentation. Then I think of the first A3 sketchbook as a place to start the final illustrations, but specifically it's a middle point where I work on just the line art. I separate it from the final A3 sketchbook, which is only for like fully final illustrations. So once I've painted, once I've used my pencils, this is essentially the end goal in this sketchbook. And I don't want to sort of mess it up with any rubbings out from the line art, Now, these days, I've started to think of the A4 sketchbook almost like a world building exercise. Now, I know, I'm far from a fancy writer, so it may even be a little bit blasphemous for me to call what I do world building, because it's not fancy at all. But the reason why I at least think of it like that is because it helps me to think of development differently. I used to think of development as this almost quite clinical step-by-step process. You had to start with thumbnails, you had to move on to drafts, and you had to then go to the final illustration. And it was almost like this predestined path. You knew exactly where you were going, and I don't know, it was just a bit formal. Now, instead of like rushing towards this known end goal, I think of at least this book as a bit more of a wander through the world in which my story is going to be set. And so that's why I try to think of it a bit like world building. I like to have a bit of a separation from the smaller books and the larger books. And I guess you could think of it kind of like field notes, maybe this is a bit of a field notes book, and you're just quickly jotting down like key points of interest in the scenery of which your story is going to take place, and then you think of the A3 sketchbooks as more of a place to specifically record a set scene. It's more detailed, it's more structured. You've had your fun wandering out in the wild, taking notes on the environment, and now you're collecting that all together, and you're like, you've designed it, and now you're executing it in your A3 sketchbook. Now, the final illustrations that end up in there, in terms of for today, it's from the same personal project as the last couple of videos, which is actually an original story concept, essentially surrounding a series of families that all have really strong shared interests that they enjoy taking part in together. Now, what I really love to do with this project is take an interest or take a hobby and turn it into a visual theme. I guess you could say like an aesthetic, really. I love to think about things thematically, and I can get really exaggerated with that. And I love creating these sort of maximalist interiors and fashion designs. That's what I love about it. So in previous videos, we've seen the foodie family and we've seen the athletic family. So for example, the foodie family, they love to cook together, but it's not like they're just cooking together in a random kitchen. They're cooking together in a kitchen that really showcases their love for food. I used lots of warm, earthy colours to create this cosy atmosphere, and they're hanging all their equipment on the wall, so like copper pans and big jars of like lentils, and they've got a little herb garden. They're really surrounding themselves with it, and they're even dressing like chefs in their own home. They're really having fun with it. Whereas with the athletic family, again, they're really taking their interest in running with it, but in a very different way. They've got these really sort of almost neon fresh colours around their house. And we've got lots of nods to Greece, actually, because there was a link to the Olympics there It's a little bit tenuous, but I have a lot of fun with it, and if you haven't seen that video, I'd recommend seeing it to be able to visualise what's going on there. So we've seen the foodie family and we've seen the athletic family. Today it's time to say hello to the musical family. So let's go ahead, shall we? I went straight in there with the room layout. Often I mess around with colour schemes and textures for a bit to warm up before thinking about the room itself. But here I had a strong concept going that I just dove headfirst into. Since this is the musical family and I knew I wanted them to be jamming together, I thought about what associations I have with live music. And one that came to mind was jazz bars. I wondered to myself, what would a speakeasy look like if it was in full colour? Instead of sultry and mysterious, could it be jovial and carefree? That's where the details like beaded lamps, curtained doorways and curved seating came from. And I landed on a juicy colour palette of tangerine, aqua and lime to really get a party atmosphere going. I imagine this family would have the most fun personality out of all the families. Maybe the foodie family would be a cosy personality, the athletic family would be quite a determined personality, and this musical family would be really upbeat. Colour can quickly communicate that sort of atmosphere in an illustration. Something unexpected that came out of this room layout doodle was the shape here. It's actually supposed to be a bird's eye view of a banquette type seat with 4 seats facing away from each other. Initially, I only drew it like this because I couldn't get my head around a straight-on perspective for it. With this section of the sketchbook, I did a real mix of perspectives, just working as quickly as I could to get my ideas on paper before my vision disappeared. You see, I get quite a strong image of what my room will look like after mulling on a theme for a while. The difficulty is translating that onto paper. But the strange choice of perspective worked out for me because seeing the shape it made, an oval with a star-like diamond in the middle, gave me an idea. It reminded me of atomic age design, a 60s art movement inspired by the space race and ideas of futurism. There were lots of combined organic and geometric shapes that were supposed to look funky and a bit out of this world. I wondered if this style would work well for my family and inject even more life into them. You'll see I took this idea and really ran with it for the fashion designs. Typically I work out the background before moving on to characters, but I was just too excited this time round. I went for some designs that wouldn't feel out of place on a holiday or at a party, because I feel like music can be just as celebratory as those type of events. I also just love a funky shirt. What can I say? It's the perfect place to showcase personality, or a bit of pattern in our case. And again, learning from my time designing the athletic family, I utilised white to give things a freshness and space to breathe. So I enjoyed designing the white dress with coloured patterns on it. The way they flow actually reminds me of piano keys. And the pattern on the left, if turned sideways, reminds me sort of musical notations on staves. These are things that weren't purposeful at the time, but I can definitely see in retrospect. And please don't just think that I'm making shiz up for the video. I think we all make a lot of subconscious links between visual ideas. For me, atomic design just worked for a music theme, and I couldn't say why until now. This is why I think if you're trying to develop a style, the trick is not to try too hard. If you draw something without much thought, you'll be pulling from your subconscious, which is typically made up of all your memories leading up till now, and all your associations from those memories that can be put towards a given project. It'll naturally be in your style, because it's in your voice, from the way that you've experienced the world up until now. After my little ramble, let's take it over to the next page in this little book. And here's where you would typically see a thumbnail from me, but I'd have to say that this is more of a mini mock-up since it took so long. I really struggled with getting the curved sofa and bar area in perspective. This time a mix of trial and error as well as instinct had to come in here. I worked initially with the curved furniture as if they were just box shapes in perspective, Then just kept rounding the edges more and more and slowly adapting the angles of the curve till they looked believable enough to me. Sometimes you just have to tough it out for a concept you're really invested in. The reason I really pushed for these curved sofas was because I knew I needed the musical family to have a lot of members. I didn't just want a 4-piece band, you know, but a whole jazz ensemble. So there naturally had to be multiple strings, multiple brass, and even a couple of percussionist players. Where on earth would I see all these musical prodigies in an average living room? So I thought curved furniture would keep things compact yet practical. Also, I really liked the look of mirroring the curve of that sofa with the curve of that home bar area. The partial symmetry is quite playful, and I enjoyed going for a cinematic look, like that of Wes Anderson, for example. I think symmetry and balance make a real impact on large-scale illustrations. You can see down here I finally got a handle on that 4-seat banquette and was just working out the furniture with a few drawings. Now, onto the mock-up, which is on loose paper this time, but usually it's in its own sketchbook. I stayed very true to that small-scale mock-up here, wrangled the curved sofa a few more times before I was satisfied, and added some nice beaded textures. There's a scale issue on the back wall, which unfortunately I didn't fix. I even let it get to the final painting stage, I'm at pains to say. I think it was partly because I didn't notice until later on, but if I'm being completely honest, I think I noticed somewhere along the line and chose to ignore it. I'd worked so long on the line art, I was just itching to get to the colour stage and see this family really come to life. For this illustration in particular, I was super excited because it was just my personal taste to a T. Everything I love. Music, maximalism, mid-century. Some of these double page spreads started to feel like real little worlds that I was bringing into being through drawing. I got so invested in some of these concepts that I just wanted them to exist. If not in the real world, of course, then at least in my designed world. I think that's why I consider myself part designer and part illustrator, because I really am designing a world how I want it to be. A world where everyone is more connected, more in tune with their interests and their hobbies, where great fashion and interiors are found everywhere. I think that's one of the great things about art, that you get to express your worldview. Some things are hard to achieve materialistically, like having this really curated life where all your furniture, fashion and free time are aligned into this one aesthetic that's just for you. You know, you can't necessarily afford that, you can't necessarily physically achieve that, but it's possible through drawing. So I think that's where I really start reaching a flow state with a project, when I'm dedicated to injecting life into something that I've imagined. Now, onto the realisation of the background in this A3 sketchbook. So, to begin with, I kept things quite simple. Mostly block colours, but with simple moments of interest, like the subtly checkered floor, the panelling on the bar, and the beaded details here and there. This is so that when my characters arrived, their patterned clothes would stand out. I think for some of the other illustrations it was the opposite way round, with wallpaper and furnishings being the main point of interest. But here, the characters are the ones adorned with patterns, and they're the real source of action in the image. They themselves decorate the space. I think after this, I got more and more ambitious with the outfits for my families, and targeted marrying the background and the characters even more. We still have fun little graphics on the album covers at the back, and they carry on that theme of using abstraction to resemble the feeling of music. Unfortunately, there is still a scale issue, as I mentioned, so I had to entirely redo this back wall later. But I didn't mind too much, as I realised I even had the speakers upside down here, which had to change. Weirdly, the part that took the longest here was the left wall of wooden slats. Getting tones smooth, especially with just one pencil along a straight line, takes an absolute age, I've found. Usually I'd use a white pencil to help blend, but I was going for a richer, deeper look here, so didn't want to muddy the colour with white. So yeah, that took me quite some time. Moving on to the characters now. I think these are my most detailed so far and took the longest because they're not just standing around but also playing instruments. I must say, the mum playing the double bass ended up having the longest end pin you've ever seen since I drew the instrument way too high. But I was really happy with the facial features here. I think a lot of my faces tend to be a bit oversimplified, but this is a nice balance of style. Getting the hand placements right was of course a challenge, and the right level of bending in the fingers took quite a few revisions. It was a fun challenge though. The dad character was fun to draw, and I'm most happy with the drape of the fabric on his outfit. I have a tendency sometimes to draw clothes fitted to the figure to avoid trying to create realistic folds or volume. But here I gave it a good go and I think it worked out. The challenge with the granddad character was mostly the instrument, the saxophone, all those keys to fit into a small space, and getting that curve just right. I'd say drawing these instruments was just the right level of frustrating. Sometimes you want a challenge to help you to learn and feel like you're fully involved in an illustration, but you don't want it to be so frustrating that you lose interest part way. Drawing the instruments and hand placements over and over kept me engaged and just on the right side of antsy. I also took my time getting the cheeks right. I wanted to show that he was blown on the saxophone, but I didn't want it to be too exaggerated and risk looking cartoony, you know? I'll let you in on a secret. In an alternate life, I'd love to be a saxophone player. I just think it's so suave, making something so difficult look so easy. That's the whole art to it. I aspire to be that cool, don't you? The little girl is a bit more simple since she's only playing maracas, but I tried a new hairstyle which I enjoyed illustrating here. In hindsight, I think I could have done the fabric draping a little better here, but I was torn between accentuating the pose and allowing the fabric space to drape. That's always a bit of a puzzler for me, getting that balance right. Her brother's drawing is alright, but I think this is one of the weaker line arts to be honest, since the shoe is a little off. Shoes always give me some trouble since I get frustrated when they're at an angle where you won't be able to see the heel or the back part. It just kind of doesn't look right to me, you know? But yeah, I probably should have left it out here. His arm was also a challenge. I'm worried I've got the T-Rex effect going on. All things to work on next time though. Then last but not least, the dog. He's a happy little fella and joining in on the fun with his tambourines. Let's not try to imagine just how out of beat this would sound along with everyone else. Maybe it's a little uncanny having the dog boogieing on his hind legs, but I think that's the fun of children's illustration. You can push reality a little bit. Even if you're not illustrating fantasy, it's fun to mess around with the constraints of reality. And it doesn't have to be limited to making dogs dance. You can show a more idealistic worldview in children's books. For example, in my illustrations, I'm normalising families spending lots of quality time together, which will hopefully lead to a positive reality as they grow up with expectations from what they've seen in books like mine. Okay, moving on to final characters in the big book. And I'll start with this one since it's new. I decided in the end that I should make the most of the seating. Maybe I went a bit mad with having the 6-seat sofa, the 4-seat banquette and all the bar stools. So I went ahead and filled at least one other seat with another kid. I picked a nice simple pose and instrument, to illustrate at least, I don't know about playing. I like the textures I created with watercolour on the jumper. I must say though, it didn't pop as much as I would have liked in the final piece, so perhaps a bit of pencil to bring out the detail wouldn't have gone amiss. Then, let's see the girls and their pooch. I think this is the first family where I got the shading right. Sometimes I'm a bit light-handed with the pencil and it leaves the people looking a bit flat, especially against the background, but I think I got the balance right this time. I went for teal for most of the instruments. It was just another layer to the theminess, you know, adding this fun colour. And here, of course, we have the longest end pin known to man. Ah well, at least it's reaching the floor. Looking back, I think it would have been fun to paint a design onto the maracas. I hesitated at the time since there's so much pattern elsewhere in the design, but it's a little odd seeing maracas without that classic stippled look. And here's the last set of characters. This is a really fun page for me, and I really enjoyed experimenting with how to balance out all those wild patterns. For this one, I chose a standout colour to mirror in the trousers. And for this one, a neutral beige tone to balance out the vividness. And for this last one, a simple white to make the colour really sing against it. I tried adding a few more wrinkles to the granddad character, as well as a white beard, as he was looking a bit too young to have grandchildren in the line art. I like some of the happy accidents that happen with the watercolour here on the shoes. It's nicely textured. I don't know what happened in the tracing stage, but I feel like the arms and the hands got a bit shrunken and twisted here, which is a shame. Once I had all my characters and all my background elements, I assembled them digitally. I created additional details like a gramophone and wall lamps, since I thought the original background was too simple. I'd been holding back to balance against the pattern clothes, but I realised I just couldn't hold back my maximalist tendencies any longer. It felt all kinds of wrong having bare walls and empty corners. Plus, I think it's these types of accessories that make a house a home. Somewhere to play your music, some mood lighting to keep things cosy, and of course some plants and some wall art at the back. The bug drawings at the back are so random, but I just thought they were simply darling. That's the only word I can think for them, darling. Look at that ladybird and tell me it's not the most darling thing you've seen. Overall, I just love this illustration. The partial symmetry is really pleasing to me, and the busy patterns keep things interesting. There's such a party atmosphere going on here that I just wish I could hop inside to hear what they're playing. Well, there we are. We've reached the end of the Sketchbook system tour for today. I hope you've enjoyed seeing my project and hearing some of my thoughts, ramblings about illustration, and I hope you'll join me for the next one. Thanks, bye!